There is a specific kind of silence that happens after you've been humiliated. Not the silence of a quiet room, the silence inside you. You replay it, over and over. The words someone said to you in front of others. The moment your voice cracked, when you tried to defend yourself and failed. The email that exposed a mistake you thought no one would ever see. The laughter that wasn't quite hidden. The look on someone's face that told you, in less than a second, exactly how small they now believed you to be. And the worst part isn't even what happened. The worst part is what happens after. The way you start rehearsing the moment in your mind at 2 a.m., editing it, trying to find the version where you said something sharper, stood taller, didn't flinch. The way you start to wonder if the people watching were right about you all along. The way a single moment of exposure starts to feel like a verdict on your entire worth as a person. You go quiet, you shrink, you start calculating your every move so it never happens again. If you are living inside that silence right now, I want you to hear something before we go any further. That shame you're carrying is not proof of who you are. It's proof that you are still capable of caring what happens to your own dignity. And that capacity, as unbearable as it feels right now, is not your weakness. It may be the very thing that saves you. The man who understood this better than almost anyone in the history of literature was Fyodor Dostoevsky. Before he was one of the greatest novelists who ever lived, he was a prisoner. He was marched in front of a firing squad on a false charge, forced to stand and wait for death, and only at the final moment was told his execution had been commuted to years of exile in a Siberian labor camp. He lived among men who had nothing left of their former social standing, thieves, murderers, the discarded of society, and he watched with unbearable clarity what humiliation does to the human soul when it is stripped all the way down. He came back from that experience believing something most of us resist, that humiliation, terrible as it is, can become the doorway to a truer self, but only if you don't let it convince you that you are what happened to you. Hashtag Promise Plus retention hook in the next few minutes. We're going to walk through 6 turning points drawn from Dostoevsky's life and his characters, men and women who were shamed, exposed, mocked and broken in public, and what separated the ones who were destroyed by it from the ones who came out the other side, more solid than before. There is one particular moment, about 2/3 of the way through this video, where we'll look at exactly what happens in the human mind in the instant before someone either collapses into permanent shame or turns and reclaims themselves. And it is not what most people expect. So if you are currently sitting with something you can't stop replaying, stay with me until the end. What I'm about to walk you through may be the difference between carrying this for years and setting it down for good. Chapter 1. The wound that has no name, humiliation, is a strange kind of pain because it doesn't just hurt, it accuses. A physical injury tells you something happened to your body. Humiliation tells you something is true about yourself. It doesn't say this was a hard moment. It says you are exposed now, and what's been exposed is the real you, small, foolish, unworthy of respect. That is the lie at the center of every humiliation. Not the event itself, but the verdict your mind quietly attaches to it. You didn't just make a mistake in front of your co-workers. You are now, in your own mind, the person who embarrassed himself in that meeting. You didn't just get rejected in front of people you wanted to impress. You are now the person nobody actually wants around. The event ends in seconds. The verdict can run for years. Dostoevsky knew this distinction intimately because he built an entire character around it. In Notes from Underground, he introduces a narrator who has spent so long absorbing the world's judgment of him that he has become his own harshest prosecutor. He mocks himself before anyone else can. He preempts humiliation by humiliating himself first, believing that if he degrades himself faster and more thoroughly than the world can, he will somehow be safe from it. This is one of the most quietly devastating psychological portraits ever written, Because so many of us do a version of this without ever naming it. We call ourselves stupid before anyone else gets the chance. We joke about our own failures in a brittle, performative way, hoping that if we say it first, it won't be able to touch us. We think we are protecting ourselves. We are actually just letting the humiliation move in permanently, unpaid rent and all, dressed up as self-awareness. Here is the truth Dostoevsky wanted you to sit with. The humiliation you experienced was an event. The self-contempt that followed it is a choice your mind made afterward. Usually so fast you didn't notice you were making it. Think about the last time you were embarrassed in a way that actually stung. Somewhere in the minutes or hours after, there was a fork in the road. On one side, that was painful, and it will pass. On the other, that is who I am now. Almost none of us consciously choose the second path. We just get swept onto it because it feels safer. Somehow, to decide the worst about ourselves before someone else gets the chance to. But safety built on self-contempt isn't safety. It's a cage you built with your own hands and then locked from the inside. Notice, too, how quickly the verdict recruits evidence for itself once it's in place. The mind, once it has decided I am the person who embarrassed himself, starts scanning backward through your entire history for confirmation. Suddenly, you remember every other time you felt small, every other room where you didn't measure up, every other person whose approval you failed to earn. It feels like memory. It's actually prosecution. The verdict is building a case, and it will use anything it can find, including moments that had nothing to do with the original humiliation at all. This is part of why humiliation feels so disproportionately heavy compared to the size of the actual event. A 90-second exchange in a meeting, a single sentence someone said to you at a party, a mistake that took less than a minute to make, and yet the aftermath can occupy months or years of your inner life. The event was small. The verdict, once it recruits your entire personal history as supporting evidence, becomes enormous. You are not actually grieving the 90 seconds. You are grieving a story about yourself that the 90 seconds gave your mind permission to finally believe. Dostoevsky's Underground Man narrates this exact process with a kind of horrified precision. He describes turning an ordinary slight over and over in his mind until it becomes, in his words, an entire philosophy of his own worthlessness, until the specific moment dissolves and all that's left is a generalized, totalizing sense that he is fundamentally unfit to be among other people. This is what happens when the verdict is left unexamined long enough. It stops being about the event. It becomes a permanent internal government, quietly running your decisions, your relationships, your sense of what you're allowed to want. So before we go further, I want to be precise about what actually happened to you versus what you have since decided it means. Something happened. It was real, and it hurt, and no one is asking you to minimize that. But the sentence that followed, "This is who I am now," was not handed to you by the event. It was written by you, in the dark, in the hours afterward, when you were most vulnerable and least equipped to be a fair judge of your own worth. The wound has no name yet, because you haven't looked at it directly. You've only felt its aftershocks, the tightness in your chest when you think about it, the urge to disappear, the impulse to over-explain yourself to anyone who might have seen. Naming it is the first act of taking it out of the dark. Not to excuse what happened, not to pretend it didn't hurt, but to separate the event from the verdict so that you can start asking a better question than "What does this say about me?" The better question is this: what did this moment ask of you, and are you willing to meet that instead of running from it? We'll come back to that. But first, we need to talk about what most people do next, because it feels like healing, and it is almost never healing at all. Hashtag chapter 2, the mask you built afterward after humiliation. Almost everyone does the same thing. Even though it feels deeply personal in the moment, they build a mask. The mask might be competence, you become relentlessly, visibly excellent at the thing you were humiliated over, not because you love it anymore, but because you cannot bear to be seen as inadequate at it again. The mask might be humor. You become the person who jokes about everything before it can be used against you, a walking disarmament system. The mask might be control. You start managing every variable of your life so tightly that surprise, and therefore exposure, becomes almost impossible. None of these are inherently bad instincts. The problem is what they're for. A mask built to protect you from ever feeling that specific kind of pain again is not the same thing as growth. It's armor grown over a wound that never actually closed. Dostoevsky wrote about this constantly through characters obsessed with pride. Men who would rather destroy a relationship, a reputation, even their own future, than risk being humiliated again. Because once you've felt that particular kind of exposure, the mind will do almost anything to avoid feeling it twice. It will trade honesty for image. It will trade closeness for control. It will trade a real life for a performed one. Because a performance, unlike a real life, can be rehearsed until it's safe. Let me tell you about a man I'll call Andrei. Andrei was humiliated publicly in his mid-20s, passed over for a promotion in a meeting where his manager, without much thought, listed the reasons he wasn't ready in front of the entire team. It lasted maybe 90 seconds. He remembers every word of it a decade later. In the years after, Andrei became the most visibly competent person in every room he entered. He worked later than anyone. He corrected people's mistakes before they were even finished speaking. He built a reputation as brilliant, relentless, and, though no one said it to his face, exhausting to be around. He told himself this was ambition. It wasn't. It was a 10-year flinch. Every late night, every obsessive correction, every time he made sure he was the smartest person in the room, was really just his nervous system trying to make sure that 90-second humiliation could never happen to him again. The cost wasn't visible for a long time. His marriage grew quiet in the way marriages do when one person is never fully present. His friendships thinned because he had no bandwidth left for anything that wasn't performance. And underneath all of it, the original wound was untouched. Still raw, still running the show, just buried under a decade of armor that everyone mistook for strength. This is what Dostoevsky meant when he wrote about the danger of pride as a substitute for dignity. Pride says, "I will never let that happen again, whatever it costs." Dignity says, "That happened, and I am still worth something regardless." Pride is defensive and exhausting. Dignity is quiet and load-bearing. Andrei had built a magnificent fortress of pride around a self he had never actually forgiven for being humiliated in the first place. If you recognize yourself in Andrei, if you've noticed that some version of your ambition, your humor, your control, your relentlessness has a slightly frantic edge to it, a sense of running from something rather than moving towards something, this is worth sitting with honestly. Not with shame, just with honesty. There's a simple test for telling a mask apart from a genuine strength, and it has nothing to do with how good the mask looks from the outside. It has to do with what happens inside you when the thing it's protecting is threatened. A genuine strength can absorb a hit and keep moving. A mask, when threatened, produces panic wildly out of proportion to the actual stakes. Andrei wasn't panicking about a minor coding error a junior colleague found. He was panicking about the 90 seconds from a decade earlier, wearing the coding error as a costume. That mismatch, the size of the reaction versus the size of the actual event, is usually the clearest evidence that a mask, not a strength, is doing the work. Masks also share a peculiar feature. They require an audience to function, even when no audience is present. Andrei corrected people's work not only in meetings, but in his head, at night, replaying conversations and inventing sharper responses he wished he'd given. The mask doesn't clock out. It runs continuously because its entire purpose is surveillance. watching for any sign that the old humiliation might be about to repeat itself. This is exhausting in a way that has nothing to do with how hard you're actually working. It's the exhaustion of a nervous system that never gets to stand down. Dostoevsky was suspicious of any strength that couldn't tolerate being seen without it. In The Brothers Karamazov, he draws a sharp distinction between two kinds of pride through the character of Dmitry Karamazov, a man whose fierce, performative honor masks an almost total absence of self-forgiveness. Dmitry can be generous, even reckless, in defense of his reputation, but he cannot sit quietly with his own flaws without spiraling into self-destruction. His pride is enormous. His dignity, for most of the novel, is nearly non-existent. Dostoevsky wanted readers to feel the difference in their bodies before they could name it intellectually. Pride is loud and needs an audience. Dignity is quiet and doesn't. If some part of you has been asking, while listening to this, whether your own competence, humor, or control might be doing double duty as both a genuine gift and a suit of armor, that question doesn't have to be answered right now, and it doesn't require you to tear anything down immediately. It only requires honesty about which parts of your strength are actually serving your life, and which parts are serving a 90-second memory that's been running your decisions without your permission. Because the mask feels like protection. But masks don't heal wounds. They just make sure no one, including you, ever has to look at them again. Chapter 3. The underground room. There's a specific stage that tends to come after the mask stops working or stops feeling like enough, and it is quieter and more dangerous than the mask itself. Withdrawal. You stop putting yourself in situations where you could be exposed again. You decline the invitation. You don't apply for the role. You don't say the thing you actually think in the meeting. You don't tell the person how you really feel about them. Slowly, without ever making a dramatic decision to do so, you build a smaller and smaller life, one with fewer opportunities for humiliation, because it has fewer opportunities for anything. Dostoevsky gave this state a name and a physical space in Notes from Underground, the underground room itself. His narrator lives in near total isolation, cut off from society, nursing his wounds in private, convinced that his withdrawal is a form of superiority, that he sees through the shallow social games everyone else is playing, and that his isolation proves his intelligence rather than his fear. This is one of the most quietly tragic self-deceptions in the entire book. The underground man isn't safe from humiliation. He has just made humiliation permanent and private instead of occasional and public. Instead of one sharp moment of shame that could pass, he has built a life where the shame never has to end, because he never gives himself the chance to prove it wrong. This pattern shows up in ordinary modern life in smaller, less dramatic ways than Dostoevsky's narrator, but the mechanism is identical. Modern shame research, the kind done by psychologists studying how people respond to social pain, has found something Dostoevsky intuited more than a century earlier, that the instinct to hide after shame is almost universal, and that hiding, while it feels protective, is one of the most reliable ways to make shame worse over time, not better. Isolation doesn't starve shame, it feeds it, because shame grows fastest in silence, where there's no other voice to interrupt the story you're telling yourself about who you are. You were not built to metabolize humiliation alone in a room. You were built to metabolize it in contact, with someone who can hear what happened to you and not flinch, not judge, not confirm the verdict your mind has already written. But the underground room feels safer than that contact, because contact requires the one thing humiliation makes almost unbearable: letting yourself be seen again, on purpose, by someone who could hurt you. This is the quiet trap. The mask exhausts you, the underground room empties you, and both of them convince you they're wisdom, when really they're just two different shapes of the same fear. If you've noticed your world getting smaller since whatever happened to you, fewer people you let in, fewer risks you take, fewer rooms you're willing to walk into. This is worth naming honestly, the same way we named the original wound. Not as failure, as information. Your mind built this room to protect you. It's allowed to want that. But you are allowed to ask whether the protection has become its own kind of prison. The underground man convinces himself, page after page, that his isolation is a form of clear-sightedness. That he alone sees how petty and performative other people's social lives are, and that his refusal to participate is evidence of his depth rather than his fear. This is one of the oldest tricks the mind plays on itself. After humiliation, it reframes retreat as wisdom. You didn't withdraw because you were afraid. You withdrew because you don't need all that anymore. You didn't stop putting yourself forward because of what happened. You just got more selective. Notice how reasonable these explanations sound. That's exactly what makes them so effective at keeping you exactly where the fear wants you. The tragedy Dostoevsky is pointing to isn't that the underground man is wrong about people sometimes being shallow or cruel. He isn't entirely wrong. The tragedy is that he has used a partial truth to justify a total retreat, and in doing so has cut himself off from the only thing that could actually prove his worst fear false: real, ongoing contact with other people, sustained long enough for a different verdict to have a chance to form. Isolation doesn't just fail to heal the wound, it removes the conditions under which healing was ever going to be possible. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes from this pattern, one that's easy to mistake for simple introversion or a preference for solitude. It's the loneliness of a person who still, quietly, desperately wants to be known, but who has convinced themselves that wanting this is dangerous. Because the last time they were fully seen, it went badly. This is not the same as genuinely enjoying your own company. It's a nervous system standing guard at a door it's terrified to open, telling itself it simply prefers the room to be empty. If any part of this describes you, the invitation here isn't to throw the door wide open all at once. That's not how trust rebuilds, and Dostoevsky's characters don't heal that way either. Raskolnikov doesn't confess to a crowd. He confesses to one person in a small room and lets that be enough for a very long time. The invitation is simply to notice the door and to notice that you're the one holding it shut. That noticing, small as it sounds, is the beginning of the room getting larger again. Chapter 4. The freedom you were afraid of here is something almost no one expects to hear about humiliation. On the other side of it is a freedom most people are quietly terrified of. Dostoevsky explored this idea most famously through a parable inside the brothers Karamazov, called The Grand Inquisitor, in which a character argues that human beings do not actually want freedom. That freedom is a burden most people will trade away for comfort, certainty, and the approval of others, given the chance. We say we want to be free, but freedom means no one else gets to tell you who you are. And if no one else gets to tell you who you are, you have to decide for yourself, and that is far more frightening than it sounds. Before humiliation, most of us are living, without realizing it, inside other people's verdicts. We are successful because others said so. We are smart because a teacher told us once, and we never let go of it. We are likable because people have generally responded well to us. Our sense of self is in large part rented from the opinions of others, and rent, as anyone who has paid it knows, can be raised or revoked at any time. Humiliation revokes it violently and without warning. Suddenly the verdict flips, and for a moment, a genuinely unbearable moment, you have no external source telling you who you are. And in that gap, that terrible unstructured silence, you are faced with a question you may have spent your entire life avoiding. Who are you when no one is telling you? This is the freedom Dostoevsky was pointing to, and it is the same freedom the Grand Inquisitor argues human beings will run from every time, because it is so much easier to hand yourself over to someone else's judgment, even a cruel one, than to stand in that unstructured space and build your own sense of worth from the ground up. Most people, when humiliated, use every tool available, the mask, the withdrawal, the frantic rebuilding of reputation, to get back into a room where someone else is once again allowed to tell them who they are. Anyone's verdict, even a harsh one, feels more bearable than the silence of having to decide for yourself. But here is the possibility Dostoevsky wanted you to consider, and it's the reason we're spending this much time in this particular chapter. That unbearable silence, the one you're trying so hard to escape, is also the only place where a self that isn't rented from anyone else can actually be built. Not a self built on the last compliment you received. Not a self built on the absence of your last failure. A self that exists prior to anyone's opinion of you, including your own harshest opinion of you. You didn't ask for this freedom. It was handed to you the moment the room went quiet and the old verdict about who you were stopped being available to lean on. It doesn't feel like a gift. It feels like falling. But it is, without exaggeration, the exact terrain on which every meaningful version of dignity has ever been built. It's worth being honest about why this feels so much worse than it sounds. Most of the language we use around freedom is celebratory. Freedom as liberation, as relief, as something to be pursued. But the Grand Inquisitor's argument was never that freedom is bad. It was that freedom is heavy, in a way most people underestimate until they're actually holding it. When someone else's verdict defines you, you always have someone to blame, someone to appeal to, someone to eventually win back over. When you are the one who has to decide your own worth, there's no one left to appeal to. The responsibility lands entirely on you, and there's a strange grief in that. A grief for the comfort of being defined by someone else, even when that definition was cruel. This is why so many people, after humiliation, rush to rebuild the old external structure as fast as possible, rather than sitting in the freedom even briefly. They want the promotion that was denied. They want the apology from the person who embarrassed them. They want, more than almost anything, for someone else to reverse the verdict. Because a reversed verdict feels so much easier than the work of no longer needing one at all. There's nothing wrong with wanting those things. But if they become the entire strategy, you've simply traded one form of dependency for another. Waiting for permission to feel whole again, instead of building wholeness that doesn't require permission. Dostoevsky's own biography is worth returning to here, because he lived through a version of this in the most literal way possible. Standing in front of that firing squad, in the seconds before his sentence was commuted, every external structure of his life, his social standing, his literary reputation, his plans, his future, was rendered completely irrelevant. There was nothing left to perform for. No one's opinion mattered in that final moment, except whatever he found within himself in the space between the order to fire and the reprieve. He wrote, for the rest of his life, about how that unbearable emptiness turned out to contain something he hadn't expected, an unshakable, almost physical certainty that his life had value regardless of what anyone else believed about it. You are very likely not facing anything as extreme as a firing squad, but the psychological shape of the moment is closer than it might seem. Humiliation strips away, however briefly, the external scaffolding you'd been leaning on to know who you are. What's left in that gap is frightening precisely because it's unfamiliar, but it is also the first honest opportunity you've had in a long time to build something that isn't at the mercy of the next person who decides to withdraw their approval. You are standing in it right now, whether you wanted to or not. Chapter 5. The night the performance broke. This is the part of the story where things tend to fall apart before they come together. And if you've been carrying humiliation for a long time, this may be the chapter that hits closest to home. Let's go back to Andrei for a moment. For 10 years, the mask worked. Not because it healed anything, but because it was strong enough to hold. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday, in a meeting that had nothing to do with the one from a decade earlier, a junior colleague pointed out a mistake in his work. A small one, an honest one, the kind that happens to everyone. And something in Andrei broke that had nothing to do with the mistake itself. He felt the exact same 90 seconds from 10 years ago flood back into his body as if no time had passed at all. His hands went cold. His voice, when he responded, came out sharper than he meant it to, defensive, cutting, aimed at someone who had done nothing to deserve it. He watched the junior colleague's face shift from confusion to hurt to a careful, guarded blankness. The exact same blankness Andrei remembered wearing himself a decade earlier. He drove home that night, unable to explain to himself what had just happened. He hadn't been humiliated in that meeting. He had, if anything, been the one doing the humiliating. And yet it felt identical. The same shame, the same tightness, the same conviction that he was, underneath everything. Still that 25-year-old being listed as not ready in front of his team. That night was the collapse of the performance. Not a dramatic public collapse. No one else in his life even knew it had happened. It was internal, and it was total. 10 years of relentless competence, of being unimpeachable, of never letting anyone see a crack, had not healed the wound at all. It had simply built an elaborate structure on top of it, and the structure had just failed under its own weight, in a random meeting over nothing. This is the moment Dostoevsky returns to again and again in his major novels, the night the performance can no longer be sustained. In Crime and Punishment, it is the night Raskolnikov, after weeks of telling himself he was untouched by what he'd done, finally collapses under the psychological weight of it and confesses. In The Brothers Karamazov, it is the moment Dmitri, humiliated and cornered, stops trying to defend the version of himself he'd been performing and simply lets himself be seen as he actually is, flawed, frightened, and human. What Dostoevsky understood, and what modern psychology has since confirmed through decades of work on shame and self-concealment, is that the mind can only sustain a gap between the performed self and the real self for so long before the cost becomes unbearable, showing up as exhaustion, sudden emotional overreactions to small triggers, a creeping numbness, or a collapse that seems to come from nowhere but has actually been building for years. The performance doesn't fail because you got weak. It fails because it was never sustainable in the first place. It was built to manage a wound, not to heal one. If something like this has happened to you, a moment where you overreacted, shut down, or fell apart in a way that felt disproportionate to what was actually happening in front of you, I want you to hear this clearly. That was not a failure of character. That was the old wound finally getting loud enough to be heard over everything you built to drown it out. It does not feel like progress when it happens. It feels like the worst version of you, arriving at the worst possible moment. But this is, almost without exception, the point in the story where something honest becomes possible for the first time in years. The mask cannot break unless it was covering something real. And the thing underneath, however raw it feels right now, is the actual you. The one that has been waiting this entire time to be let back into the room. Andrei described the days after that meeting as the strangest of his adult life, not because anything visibly dramatic happened, but because he could no longer perform the certainty he'd been performing for a decade. He found himself, for the first time in years, unable to answer simple questions about his own competence with his usual confidence. Colleagues noticed a hesitation in him that hadn't been there before, and tellingly, most of them found him easier to be around, not harder, though it took him weeks to notice that, because he was too busy interpreting the hesitation as failure rather than as the first honest thing he'd shown anyone in a very long time. This is the part of the collapse that's easy to misread from the inside. When the performance breaks, it doesn't feel like relief. It feels like proof that the original humiliation was right about you all along. That you really are as fragile, as inadequate, as exposed as you always feared. This is the most dangerous moment in the entire process, because it is exactly here that people either double down on an even more rigid version of the old mask, or they finally let the collapse mean something different, not confirmation of the old verdict, but the end of a structure that was never built to hold a real life in the first place. Dostoevsky understood this moment with almost clinical precision because he watched it happen over and over among the prisoners he lived alongside in Siberia. Men who had spent their entire lives performing toughness, status, or invulnerability would sometimes, under the sheer weight of the camp's daily humiliations, finally break. And in that breaking, something unexpected would surface. Not weakness exactly, something closer to honesty. A prisoner who had been feared and respected for his hardness might, in a quiet, unguarded moment, admit to another prisoner that he was terrified, that he missed his family, that he didn't know who he was without the reputation he'd spent years building. Dostoevsky noted that these were almost always the men who eventually found some kind of peace, even in that brutal setting, not the ones who held the mask together the longest, but the ones who let it break and discovered they survived the breaking. This is what the collapse is actually offering you, underneath how unbearable it feels. Not evidence that you were right to fear exposure all along. Evidence that you can be exposed, genuinely, completely exposed, the thing you've spent years engineering your entire life to avoid, and still be standing afterward. That is not a small thing to learn about yourself. For some people, it is the single most important thing they ever learn. If you're currently in the middle of this kind of collapse, if something recently has cracked open in a way you can't fully explain, and you're frightened by how disproportionate your reaction felt to whatever triggered it, I want to say this as plainly as I can. You are not regressing. You are not losing whatever progress you thought you'd made. You are finally close enough to the original wound that it can actually be touched, examined, and, for the first time, treated, instead of merely managed from a distance. Chapter 6. Confession and the return to yourself there is a reason confession sits at the emotional center of almost every major Dostoevsky novel. And it is not about religion, or guilt, or punishment in the way people usually assume. Confession, in Dostoevsky's world, is the moment a person stops managing the distance between who they performed and who they actually are, and simply closes it. Raskolnikov's confession does not undo his crime. It does something different, and, in some ways more important, it ends the exhausting internal work of maintaining a false self, and lets him finally stand in front of another person. In front of himself, as he actually is. This is what has to happen after the performance breaks. Not punishment, not more armor, not a better, more convincing mask. Something much smaller and much harder, telling the truth to at least one other person about what actually happened to you and what it did to you. For Andrei, this looked like a conversation he did not want to have. Weeks after the meeting that broke something in him, he sat down with his wife, the person he had been quietly, unintentionally absent from for a decade, and told her about the 90 seconds from his 20s for the first time in his life. Not the polished version, not the version where he came out looking resilient, the actual version, including how much it still controlled him, how much of the last 10 years had secretly been about never feeling that small again. He expected, on some level, to be humiliated all over again, this time by the person whose opinion mattered most. What happened instead was smaller and stranger and more healing than he anticipated. She didn't flinch. She didn't confirm the old verdict. She said, simply, that she had wondered for years what he was running from, and that she was glad to finally know. This is the thing humiliation convinces you will never happen, that if the real, unguarded, unimpressive version of you were seen, it would be rejected. Confession, real confession, not performance dressed up as vulnerability, is the test of that belief. And more often than the fearful part of your mind wants to admit, the belief turns out to be wrong. You do not have to confess the specific event that humiliated you to everyone in your life. That's not what this is. What has to happen is smaller and more private. You have to stop lying to yourself about what it did to you, and let at least one person, a partner, a friend, a therapist, Even a version of yourself you're willing to be honest with in a quiet moment. See the actual shape of the wound instead of the mask you built over it. Dostoevsky believed, and wrote across nearly every major work he produced, that a person becomes free the moment they stop lying to themselves. Not free from consequences, not free from the past. Free from the exhausting, endless labor of managing a performance that was never going to heal anything, no matter how convincing it got. There's a reason confession has to happen out loud, to another person, rather than simply being resolved privately in your own head. Something about the presence of another human witness changes the nature of the experience in a way that private reflection, however honest, cannot replicate. This isn't a mystical claim, it shows up clearly in modern research on shame as well. Work on shame resilience has consistently found that shame loses much of its power specifically in the presence of empathy from another person, while it tends to intensify in isolation, no matter how much private thinking a person does about it. Dostoevsky arrived at the same conclusion through fiction a century earlier. His characters do not heal by thinking their way out of guilt. They heal by finally letting another person see it. This is also why confession is so terrifying, and why so many people, even after the mask has broken, still avoid it for months or years. There's a specific fear underneath the fear of judgment, and it's worth naming directly. The fear that if you tell someone the full truth of what happened and what it did to you, they will finally see what you've suspected about yourself all along. That you are, underneath everything, not as strong, not as impressive, not as together as you've worked so hard to appear. This is the exact fear the underground man never tests, because he never confesses to anyone. He stays in the room, imagining the humiliation of being truly known, and treats the imagined humiliation as though it were as real as the original one. Andrei's confession to his wife is a small, unremarkable moment in the scope of a marriage. No dramatic music, no cinematic turning point, just two people at a kitchen table on an ordinary evening. But it's worth sitting with what actually happened in that moment, because it's the same mechanism Dostoevsky returns to again and again across his major novels. The fear that had run Andrei's decisions for a decade was not, in the end, a fear of his wife's judgment. It was a fear of a judgment that existed only inside his own head, one he had never actually tested against a real person, in a real room, with real stakes. The moment he tested it, it dissolved. Not because his wife was unusually forgiving, but because the fear had been oversized from the beginning, built in the dark, where fears always grow larger than the truth can support. You may not have a kitchen table moment available to you right now, and that's all right. Confession doesn't have to happen all at once, and it doesn't have to happen with the person closest to you first. Sometimes it starts smaller, telling a friend one true sentence about what happened, instead of the polished version you've been giving everyone else. Writing it down somewhere honest, even if no one reads it yet. Saying, out loud, to yourself, in a quiet moment, the thing you've been avoiding saying, even in your own head. Each of these is a small closing of the distance between the performed self and the real one. None of them require you to be ready for everything at once. This is not the end of the story, but it is the hinge on which everything after it turns. #resolution and integration here is what nobody tells you about surviving humiliation. The goal was never to become a person nothing can touch. That's the fantasy the mask was selling you. Invulnerability, a self so polished and controlled that shame could never find purchase again. It's a fantasy because it isn't available to anyone. Not to Dostoevsky, who spent his entire life circling this same wound in book after book. Not to Andrei, who is not healed in any tidy sense. He still feels a flicker of that old 90 seconds sometimes. In certain rooms, under certain kinds of scrutiny, and not to you, whatever form your own humiliation took. What becomes available instead, slower, quieter, far less cinematic than the fantasy of invulnerability, is something closer to what Dostoevsky actually meant by dignity. Not a self that can't be hurt. A self that can be hurt and still knows, underneath the hurt, that it is not the verdict that was passed on it. A self that can walk back into the room where it was humiliated without needing to prove anything to anyone in it, including itself. This doesn't arrive as a single moment of triumph. It arrives the way most real change arrives, as a slow reweighting of what you believe about yourself. Tested against small moments where the old story wants to take over, and you choose, deliberately, not to let it. The next time you make a mistake in front of people, and you feel that old tightness rising, and you don't reach for the mask, and you don't retreat to the underground room, that's it. That's the whole thing. Not dramatic, just quietly different from how it used to go. You will likely still carry some version of what happened to you. Dostoevsky's characters do not emerge from their suffering unscarred. They emerge changed by it, carrying it differently. Raskolnikov does not unlive what he did. He learns to live honestly alongside it, in the open instead of underground. That is the most any of us are offered, and it turns out, against every instinct that told you otherwise, to be enough. If you are still in the room where it happened, still replaying it, still building the mask, still shrinking your life to avoid feeling it again, you are not behind. You are simply at an earlier point in a process that does not move in a straight line. The wound has to be named before it can be understood. The mask has to be recognized before it can be set down. The underground room has to be noticed before you can choose to walk back out of it. And the confession, when it finally comes, rarely feels heroic in the moment. It usually just feels like relief, arriving quietly, long after you stopped believing it was possible. You are allowed to still be afraid of being seen. You are allowed to still flinch. What you are not required to do, not anymore, not because I'm telling you, but because Dostoevsky spent an entire difficult life proving it, is to let one moment, or one room, or one person's judgment be the final word on who you are. It helps, in the months after something like this, to have a way of noticing when the old pattern is trying to reassert itself, because it will. You'll walk into a room and feel the old flinch. You'll make a small mistake and feel the disproportionate flood of shame that has nothing to do with the size of the mistake. This isn't a sign that nothing has changed. It's simply the wound reminding you it existed. The way a scar can still ache in certain weather long after it's closed. The difference now is that you have a name for it. You know it's the old verdict trying to reassert its authority, not new evidence about who you actually are. That knowledge alone changes the entire experience, even when the feeling itself hasn't fully gone. Dignity, in the way Dostoevsky wrote about it, was never a permanent achievement you arrive at and keep forever. It's closer to a practice, something you return to, again and again, every time the old fear tries to convince you to go back underground, back behind the mask, back into silence. Some days that return will be effortless. Other days it will feel like the hardest thing you do. Both are part of the same process, and neither one disqualifies you from it. What matters is not that you never feel the flinch again. What matters is that the flinch no longer gets to make your decisions for you. Somewhere, right now, there is a version of you standing in the exact silence we started with, the one after the humiliation, replaying the moment, waiting for the verdict to feel less true. If this found you at a moment when you needed it, I hope you'll stay a little longer with these ideas. Subscribe if you want to keep walking through this territory together, and if you know someone carrying something similar, something they haven't said out loud yet, consider sending this to them. Sometimes the thing that breaks the silence isn't a grand confession. It's just one person quietly showing another that they're not as alone in this as they think. Because that silence inside you, the one after the humiliation, the one you've been sitting in, was never proof that you had lost yourself. It was proof you were still there, waiting to be found.